Most people jump straight into building automations without any planning, and that's exactly why they fail. In this video, I'll take a different approach with this faceless video automation I'm about to build. The features alone are going to change everything. Today, I'm walking you through the strategic framework that will make this project successful. Plus, I'm showing you exactly what the system will do. So if you're dying for actual advice on how to build AI automations, instead of just templates that don't teach you anything, this video is for you. All right, so let's jump into the AI automation project planning document. I'm going to go through a new project that I want to build out. And then from this document, I'm going to actually build out the project in other videos. So let's get started. Now I have broken this down into what I call the quick start guide, and then also a more complete set of questions. So I often just use the quick start guide. Let me switch over to a template that I haven't filled out yet, which is just made up of a few basic questions here. And it's really like the shorthand of what I have down below, which is just a more robust series of questions to ask yourself, what should you build? Really helping you think that through. What value will this generate? Giving you prompts to help you think deeper about what you're about to create before you build it. And this is one of my favorites. What are the deal breakers? What are the things that I have to know or have to figure out in order to build this so that it's not just a waste of time? You might imagine some project that you want to build, but you might have to actually do some research or actually build something small first before you actually build the whole automation, so that you know that you can actually build it. And that's what I call like a deal breaker. And then of course, what are the triggers and steps of your automation? What triggers different automations to run, and what are those steps after the triggers? And what data do we need to manage? So often if it's just more than an automation, you're going to need some sort of database to keep track of data from point to point. And then what is the minimum viable product? What is the smallest thing that we could build to get going and actually have something that's useful, but not necessarily take 3 years to build? Often what I find is that if you build something small and get people using it, you're actually going to change directions and build something that's more useful than trying to build out every little thing ahead of time. So let's go ahead. I'm going to use the quick start guide for describing this next project that I'm going to build, which is the next version of the content story magic. So this is a faceless video generator that I built, which was really cool, but it had a few problems. And so I want to rebuild it. So when I start to think about this project and how it should be rebuilt, the first question I always ask myself is, why do I want to rebuild it? Well, first and foremost, version 2, the version that I have right here, is about a year old now. Not quite a year, maybe 9 months. And a lot has changed since then. So I was one of the first people on YouTube to develop a faceless video generator. I built a couple of different ones, but since then, a lot of other creators have created their own versions, which are super cool as well. So I want to incorporate a lot of the things that I've seen other creators do, but I also want to bring that special skill that I bring to the table, which is really the systems architecture and how to build a really robust system to manage all of these multiple stories all in one system. And then also give people the ability to actually use the NCA toolkit, which is this free tool that I have here, which allows people to access a lot of video processing functions, like being able to caption videos, concatenate videos together, split videos, cut videos, trim videos. There's a lot of video processing features that we can add to the system in case people want to do more advanced video editing with their faceless video automations. So I want to incorporate all of the cool stuff that's happened since the last version. I want to maintain the cool database that we've had that allows a lot of advanced video features. And I also want to fix some of the bugs that I've had in previous versions, especially related to voiceovers. The way it was designed before is that it was creating voiceovers for individual shots. Because of that, it was creating segments of audio that would then be spliced together. And it would kind of create this kind of choppy effect when you spliced all of the audio back together again. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we fix that. So that's really the why. That's why I want to build it. Then when I sit down to create a project, I start to think about what are the wow factors? What's going to make this better than anything else on the market? Well, one of the things I've known since the very beginning, and it's the reason why I built the No Code Architects Toolkit in the first place, automating all of this and trying to do everything, it can be quite expensive. So part of this next project is, how can we design and build a faceless video generator that is near zero cost? And I think a lot of that involves helping people install that locally so that they don't have to use external paid services. So to do that, we have to show people how to install the NCA toolkit locally and use that locally on their computer. Then it would be 100% free. We have to show people how to install N8N locally on their computer. This previous version also used Airtable. So we have to look at other platforms like Baserow, which are free database platforms that you can actually install on your computer. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we might do that in just a bit. And if we have to generate images or turn images into videos, how can we do that at almost a near zero cost? So we have to explore that. That's definitely going to be one of the deal breakers. So I'm going to drop down here and put that in here. And then next up, I want to make sure that we can fully automate video. So if we just put in an idea, it can create that video without any intervention from beginning to end, or can we partially automate it? So there's lots of people that want to just come up with an idea and have it spit out the final video. But there's a lot of other creative people out there that they want to create the video, they want to create the different shots, they want to approve those shots, maybe they want to edit the shot, and then they finally want to splice it all together and produce that final video. One of the differentiators in this system is that it's fully automated, or it can be partially automated, or not automated at all. And so next up is we want to allow people to swap in new AI models. So one of the things that I've noticed is that whenever someone builds out one of these automated solutions, they're using some sort of AI model. Maybe it's Flux, or maybe it's Midjourney, or maybe it's this or it's that, but you're really kind of tied to whatever they decided to use in that automation. So what I want to be able to do is make it so that you can swap in your own AI models and use whatever you want. So we've got a lot of different features that we're trying to build into this system, right? We're trying to make it near zero cost for the people that want that. So we have to find a low cost solution that allows them to use whatever models will allow almost free. But for the people that want to use their own AI models, maybe they don't mind spending more on the different images or the video creation, we want to be able to make it so that they can use it as well and use whatever model they want for their system. So we got to make sure we bring that in there as well. Now, the next thing is that we need to make this super simple and easy to use. So the one disadvantage of this system that I built before was that it was very robust and very cool, but it was a little bit complicated for people to set up. So once you had it up and running, it was really powerful. You had the ability to manage all of your shots, and then scenes were made up of different shots, and then your stories were made up of scenes. So it provided a lot of flexibility with that. You could also keep a record of all of your different stories, which was really cool. You could manage the story. It would keep track of all of your videos for any given story. It would go all the way to the end and it would caption your video. You even had the ability to create different story types. So you could have different types of videos. So you could have a dramatic movie, you could have comic book news style, you could have a style for faceless video generators. And for each of those, you could create different prompts to create different types of images, which was super cool. And then you could also set it up so that it used different models. So here we had image actions where we could use OpenAI to generate images, or we could use different models, and you could configure that all here. You could change what was creating the voiceovers, whether it was 11 Labs or some other API that you wanted to use. And you could do the same thing with video. So you could use the NCA toolkit to turn images into video, or you could use something like Luma, or you could use something like Kling. And you were able to configure that per story type. So if you created a different type of story, each different story could have different prompts, and it could also use different AI models. And the other thing that was pretty cool is that when you started to create all of your different images, it would keep track of all of these different files so that you could reuse them later. So if you created different stories, you could always reuse those images in your stories and in other stories. So it was nice to be able to keep track of all of the images that you created, because you're actually paying money for these things. So when you just create them in an automation and then you lose them, and you don't have all of these different stories, it's really a loss. So this system was originally designed to really help you manage all of these stories as well as create them. But again, this system was a bit hard to set up. There were quite a few Airtable automations in here. If you followed my instructions precisely, you would get it done, but it was a little bit difficult. So what I want to do in this next system is, part of the wow factors of this automation is going to be, how easy can we make this to set up? And then I was really starting to think, okay, well, what could really take this to the next level? And I was thinking, well, what if we were able to vibe code a graphical front end to this whole system? And I started to look into what was available. And there's actually some really cool open source projects that allow you to actually edit videos, put videos on a timeline. You can manage when they come in and out. And I was starting to think, okay, well, if we're going to really differentiate ourselves, wouldn't it be cool if we could actually build a video editor on top of it so that it's not just this database that you manage the video in. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But this section is important here. This is how you separate yourself from the rest, right? So you really want to sit down when you're planning your automations and think, okay, what are the wow factors for this? Why am I building this? And what are the wow factors that are going to separate me from everyone else? And then you want to think through these deal breakers. So this is going to be different for everybody. If you're just a beginning automator, well, then you're going to have additional deal breakers because you're not going to necessarily know what you're capable of doing. So whenever you are building out this automation, you start coming up with these cool ideas. What you want to do is you want to list out the different things that you don't know are possible or that you don't know how to do so that you can focus on these first. Because if you start to build out this automation and there's some sort of deal breaker that it's going to make it impossible for you to finish, well, you'd rather figure that out first than trying to figure that out later. So the deal breakers for me is it not easy to install? Like if I can't make this easy, there's really no point in building it because I already have a difficult one that people can use. What I have found with your automation is that this is one of the most overlooked pieces of an automation. People focus on the wow factor, but if the wow factor means that nobody can use it, they can't install it or set it up, then nobody's really going to use it and it's not going to get traction. So this is something that I've been really focused on. And then can we make it almost free? So I need to make sure that I can set all this up, I can make it easy, and it's almost free. So one of the things that I've been exploring is that there is the Flux model out there, and there are some open source versions of it. What I want to figure out, and what I think I can do, is set this up so that people can actually install this locally and access it through an API. So one of the things that I've been working on, so I have the No Code Architects Toolkit, and it has a few limitations, but I am working on a version 2 that overcomes a lot of these different limitations. And one of those is allowing people to actually access free models like Flux locally on their computer through an API. And so one of the things that I want to do in this next version here is make it so that people can actually generate images locally on their computer for almost free. And so that will involve helping them set up Flux in an easy way. I have to make it easy and free. And so a lot of time and energy has to go into that process, because if I can't do that, there's really no reason to build it. And then I also have to go through and really just confirm that these other database alternatives can do what Airtable can do. And so when I go through this section down here where we talk about the different databases, I'm going to also talk a little bit about the NCA toolkit and also the software Docker, which is a key tool that will allow us to install a lot of this stuff locally on our computer in an easy way and make it free at the same time. So in the what I need to learn section, this is where I map out what are the things that I need to learn, what are the things I need to research, because I think this is one of the aspects in the no code space that I see the least. I see people teaching people how to install templates, but I don't see people really showing people how to come up with really cool automations and think it through. Because one of the biggest things that I never see anybody do is actual research. So when I started to think about the wow factors and actually vibe coding a graphical front end, I spent quite a bit of time just in Claude, just researching different front ends that we can use for visual editing, because there's a bunch of software out there where people have built out these really cool projects. Like we can go to this again as well, where people have built out these cool projects. And if you do a little bit of research, you can find these gold nuggets, which would allow you to build far more superior automation. So you're not going to find this stuff in a guru's YouTube video. Well, you might, but if you do a little bit of research on your own through Claude and you really articulate what you're trying to do and you're trying to find different projects, especially in the open source world, you find a bunch of stuff that you might not otherwise have found. So let's take a look at some of these different projects here that I'm considering. And let's start with the Airtable Alternatives, because this is going to give me a little bit of an opportunity to explain the tool Docker in a little bit more detail so that you understand what it is and then how it can help us package everything up into this nice little box that we can install locally and make things super easy to install onto our local computer, So we don't have to pay all these API fees to all these different companies just to do something like create a faceless video. So the original version was built out in Airtable, which is a really cool platform. I like it, but it does cost 20 bucks a month. But there's these 3 other alternatives that I've been looking at for quite a while. There's Baserow, and there's also NoCodeDB. And I believe all of these have a free version. You can all start them for free, but I think all of these will allow you to install locally and you don't have to pay it at all. And then there's this one, Table. I think Table is probably the most experimental right now. But let's go ahead and check out Baserow. So I haven't actually used this before, except for maybe a year or so ago when I was taking a look at different alternatives to Airtable. It does look like a pretty robust alternative to Airtable. You can get started for free and you can also self-host it and you can deploy this on Docker. So maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about Docker and why this is potentially a great solution. So what Docker is, if you think about a container ship, I'm going to do my best to draw one of these here. And we all know that they have all of those little boxes on there, right? And what that allows it to do is to, in a very standardized way, have a spot for each of these containers to live. And if one of these containers needs to be refrigerated, well, it already has all of the inputs and outputs on that container where they can just hook up a power cable to it, then they can supply power, and then they can refrigerate the contents of that container. And then when it gets to the dock, there's all these different cranes that are specially designed for this size container, and everything's standardized. And so it allows you to basically package up software and put it in that container so that you don't have to install all of that software ad hoc onto a system. Because if you think about a Mac here, right? So we've got this Mac system here. We've got all of these different applications that are all running together. And for your desktop, that makes a lot of sense. But with these open source packages, oftentimes they have different requirements. They have different dependencies. So in order to install Baserow, maybe you have to use JavaScript. Maybe you have to use Python. Maybe it requires some other library, right? When you try to install all of these different libraries onto a single system, they start to conflict with each other. Maybe Baserow needs something that actually conflicts with the NCA toolkit, for instance. Maybe the NCA toolkit uses a platform called FFmpeg and it needs a specific version. Maybe it needs version 2, whereas hypothetically Baserow needs version 1, right? So if we try to install all of those different dependencies into one big system, they can conflict with each other and cause problems. What Docker does is it allows you to install each of these different applications inside this container where it can't affect some other container. So I can have the NCA toolkit running with its versions and its dependencies, and I can have Baserow running in its own system, and they won't interfere with each other. Plus, I can set up simple instructions so that I can deploy this container very easily. So when you look at the NCA toolkit, for instance, if you actually look at the code, there's going to be this file here, and it's called a Docker file. And essentially what this is it's instructions on how to set up the container, right? And the container, you can just consider it almost like it's a PC, right? You got the monitor and you got your desktop here. And when you buy a new Mac, you go through the installation process and you install a bunch of different things. And that's exactly what a Docker file is. Line by line, we're essentially just installing things into the container in a very programmatic way so that at any moment I can replicate this container just by following these instructions. So when I go to Docker and I say, build me a new container, it's going to follow these instructions every time. And that way, when I copy it to your computer and you install it, it's going to install the exact same container on your computer as it would be on my computer. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a PC or a Mac or on Linux. Every time we run this Docker file, we're going to have the exact same image. And that way, when you're building your applications, you can rely on the fact that it's consistently built and it's not going to be different depending on what platform it is. So that's the first step, which is the Docker file. So you can see here that Baserow supports Docker. So if we click through here, they're going to give you instructions on how to deploy this. You can run this locally. You can run this in the cloud. You can spin up a server. Everything is going to be great. Now, the other thing that you might come across from time to time is something called Docker Compose. So let's cover that a little bit as well, because this is going to be an important part in getting this to work. Because Docker is great, but if my instructions tell you to, well, you're going to need this Docker container, you're going to need Docker container A, and then you're going to need Docker container B, and then you're going to need Docker container C. And then I'm going to tell you how to set all these up individually, and then I'm going to show you how to connect them all together. Well, that would work, but it's going to be difficult. What Docker did was they came up with something called Docker Compose, and I have an example here as well, and I'll explain how this works. But what Docker Compose does is that this is essentially a template on not only how to build the individual containers, but also how to orchestrate them and set them up so that they're already working together without having to set anything up. So with one command and a Docker Compose file, I can help you launch all of these and then help you connect them all together in the proper way so that you don't have to think about it. And if you start to look at these across projects, you're going to notice that there's a lot of similarities. So this one here, this image here, this is an actual image that creates a Docker container. And you're going to see this in a lot of projects. If you look at the N8N Docker Compose file, you're going to see this. If you look at the NCA toolkit Docker container, you're going to see this. And what this is doing is that it's allowing you to set this up on a server and get your SSL security certificate set up, which is normally a pain. In the past, you had to pay $100 every time you set this up. But then along came a company called Let's Encrypt, and they made it so that this is essentially free, which was great. But it still wasn't easy to set up. And so what this particular part of the Docker file does is that all it does is set up our SSL certificate so that when you set up N8N and you go to your N8N instance, that it is secured and you get that little lock, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be. So this whole section here is setting up a service so that when you set up your service and somebody connects to your website, it's going to have that little secure lock, just like it does in your browser here where you have the HTTPS. So that's all this is doing. And you're going to see this duplicated in a lot of different Docker files. And then you can set up the other services here. So this is the NCA toolkit. So if I didn't have this, you could install the NCA toolkit, but it wouldn't be secure, right? So by having one Docker Compose file gives you the ability to launch everything in one action with everything set up and connected with all of the proper security put together. Now, when you install more complicated projects, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Docker containers all connected to each other. And the Docker Compose file is going to orchestrate that deployment for you. So again, getting back to these alternatives, we have base row, which I'm going to do some research on and figure out how this compares to Airtable. We also have NoCoDB. And again, as you look at these different solutions, really look to see how they're different and what they bring to the table. There's a lot of opportunity that's missed by just grabbing the tool that somebody else uses. You may not be able to understand every little thing or technical difference between these two things, but the genius with these new AI tools is that even if you don't understand, you can say, what's the difference between Airtable and base row? There's no reason why you can't type that. And then it's going to explain it. And then again, if there's anything in here that you don't understand, then you can keep digging and continue to ask Claude to explain it to you as a child. Just keep going deeper on things until you understand. All of us are at some experience level. You know, I've been working with technology for 30 years, so I might be here, you might be here, but we are all trying to go here. I spend hours with Claude just doing research to help me fill the gap of going here. So when I was rebuilding the NCA toolkit, I'm going to make videos on this as well. I did a great deal of research so that when I did the version 2, it would be 10 times better. But there were a lot of things I didn't know. There were lots of tools that I didn't know. It's not like I just sat down and was like, oh, I'm going to make version 2. Hey, Claude, help me make version 2 and make it better. No, I had to ask Claude. I said, hey, like, how are people building these types of APIs? Here's some of the challenges we had before. What are some of the tools that are out there that I don't know about? And I just went back and forth with Claude and we figured a bunch of stuff out. I'm going to make another video specifically on the toolkit and version 2 in that research process and what came from it. It's important to learn how to do this research. Anytime you just don't understand something, just say, hey, can you explain more about this? Help me understand this. Why is this important? Are you sure that this is something that means something to me? Why would I care? If you ask those questions, you're going to learn a lot more throughout the process. So again, then there's also no code DB. I'm going to do additional research on this. This one was interesting to me because it was also running a Postgres database in the backend. So if you wanted to have like a true database like Supabase in the backend that's running Postgres, a real DB, but you still wanted that nice web front end, then this would be a really interesting solution. I believe you can also install this one locally as well for free and use Docker to deploy it. And then there's also this one here, which is called Airtable, which is interesting as well. This one is built, from what I can understand from the research I've done so far, that it's built for scale. They were really trying to build something that could handle millions of rows. And so again, that's another thing that you want to think about, right? So like Airtable is not designed to work with millions of rows. I think even on their most advanced plan, it only goes up to 250,000 rows. So if you wanted a solution, a web database solution like Airtable that was super scalable, even when you got to 1 million rows, then you might want to look at something like Airtable. And they have a GitHub repository as well. So this is something that you can also self-host and use for free. So next up, this is where I was pretty excited in terms of the wow factors, really adding on a graphical interface. So I did a bunch of research on all of the open source projects that allowed you to create a front end. So we have this one here. It works with video, audio, images, text. So you can design a whole video in here. It's got these different effects. It's got a fill. So you can actually and then you can export the video. So now the thing that I need to research is like, how do I interface this with some sort of database on the back end? So I have Airtable here or one of these other solutions. So when I'm using these tools and uploading videos and adding them to the timeline, how do I tie this back to, and let's see, I can add an image as well. Add that to the timeline. If I had an interface like this, how do I tie it back to a database so everything's working together? So there's a lot of research to be done there. And then beyond that, there's quite a few different projects, right? So there's projects like this, which are pretty feature complete, but it might make it difficult to customize and use in the way you want. And then there's other projects like this Fabric.js, which are a little bit more like tools. So this is more of like a tool that you can use. And they've got a bunch of different things, not just for video manipulation, but they have things for, if we go to home here, it's basically a JavaScript library that lets you do a bunch of different things. You can do text editing, you can do image filtering, you can do different animations. There's a bunch of demos here that you can play around with. So if you research, you can find this, like you can actually draw, which is pretty cool. So just doing some research and finding these tools will actually help expand what you can do. So if I picked Fabric.js, then more than likely what I'm probably planning on doing is, instead of having something that's more built out like this, is I would use Fabric.js to build something like that. And that might work better if I need to integrate it with a database, but there's more research that needs to be done in order to figure that out. There's this other tool here that I thought was pretty interesting. It's got a timeline editor here. This one seems to be more around doing JavaScript automations and editing your timeline in that way. So I don't know if this one's really the right fit. This one seemed pretty interesting as well. This one looked like kind of like Descript, if you've ever seen Descript, where you've got a video on the left-hand side and then you've got your text along the side and you can do your editing. This looked really interesting and it's open source as well. So I would be able to import this into a project and use it. Then I saw this actual paid product, which isn't that expensive. And right now they've got 50% off. So it ends up being like $100, although that doesn't fit in my near free requirement, but it did look pretty cool in terms of editing software, right? So you've got a whole web-based editing software here that would be really cool for editing your faceless videos. And so it's at least worth looking at, hey, is this a solution that is so good that it's worth spending a little bit of money to actually use it? And then there was another one here called Wave Surfer. This is a little bit more like Fabric.js, where they've got a bunch of different types of tools and you can use them and build out front ends to do audio. You can add in all these different controls here to control the volume of audio. It's really cool. They've got a bunch of other things as well for video and other tools that you might be able to use in your projects. So again, this highlights how important your research is and your ability to sit down and kind of articulate the why behind your project, the wow factors, the deal breakers, and what you need to learn and what you need to research before you even get started if you want to stand out from your competition. And then usually once I have this, I go ahead and sit down and I think a little bit about that database structure. I already have a lot of that mapped out because I have a database already. So in the next version, what I'm really doing is more just simplifying everything versus trying to come up with the system. Like I'm going to get rid of the scenes. I'm just going to have shots and stories. And then I'm just going to simplify a lot of the different views here along the side. And then you're going to come up with all of the different processes. So what are all the different triggers and the steps that you need to take in your automation to actually build it out? So if you want access to this document and you really want to learn how to think and build master automations, make sure to jump into the No Code Architects community. You'll find that template here inside of the Quick Start course for N8N. And we've got a bunch of other courses as well, like how to make money with AI automation. And it's really just a group of dedicated builders. And we also help all members solve 100% of their tech issues. And we've got calls almost every single day to support you. And on some days, we even have 2 different calls. I'd love to see you inside the community. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. And make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be building out the entire Content Story Magic version 3 here on YouTube. And of course, I will have all of the final templates that make it super easy for you to install inside the community. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you on the next one.